Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alta Live. Today, we are going to discuss sea urchins. I titled this event Kill the Urchins. In fact, the article in Alta that inspired this Alta Live is by Kailyn McCord, and it's called Kill an Urchin, Save a Sea. And it seemed so counterintuitive to me when I read it that I went on a quest to find a biologist who could explain to us what's going on with sea urchins along the Pacific coast. And I found the wonderful Maya Munstermann, who was kind enough to agree to join us and help explain what's going on with sea urchins, why they are becoming a problem or an invasive species, why stakeholders are actively trying to cull the sea urchin population. And cull is a very nice word for murder. Uh, and we're going to learn more about that. So before we dive in, I've got my two little spiels. The first is to tell you all about Maya. Maya Munstermann is currently a PhD candidate at Cal and in the integrative biology department with research focusing on the effects of climate change and marine heat wave events on kelp forest ecosystems. She's actually, I was asking, like, are urchins your thing? And the answer was, yes, indeed they are. So she is going to kind of be our urchin expert today and hopefully be able to answer some of our questions and yours as well. If you are unfamiliar with Alta Journal, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. Hold on, I can't see myself, which is terrifying. God forbid. Alta, this current issue of Alta is 25 books that define California. And my God, did we get a lot of mail about the books that we have left off this list that should be on this list that people have read and hated. So keep that mail coming. It's really fun. We post it online. But of course, with cover stories like this, there are additional stories within Alta. We've got great stories about the Tahoe bear problem in here, the sea urchins, a really cool true crime story by Ruby McConnell. So, and of course, our usual cartoons. You can score Alta for $50 a year. You get 4 gorgeous issues of Alta, as well as a special gift. Right now, that special gift is a collection of the first 5 years of all of the cartoons that have appeared in the print Alta edition. I do want to invite you to 2 events, 2 in-person real-life events coming up that are free. The first is at Menlo Park at Kepler's Books and Magazines on April 15th. Tax day. That starts receptions at 6 p.m., events at 7, and that is with Rachel Kushner, Charlie Jane Anders, and Jose Vadi, where we are going to be discussing the 25 books that define California. We're also going to be at the LA Times Festival of Books. That is April 26th and 27th on the campus of USC. So if you are in the neighborhood of either of those, come hang out with us. Let's talk books. We can even talk urchins because I am very into this subject. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions. This interview will be recorded and posted to Alta Online. It will also be emailed to you later this afternoon, along with Kaylyn's article about the urchins and anything else that pops up throughout my conversation with Maya today. I keep wanting to say dive in. I can't help it. It's a mom joke. Maya, where are you located right now?
Yeah, so I split my time half between Berkeley on campus and then here in Bodega Bay where I am right now, not underwater, but at the Marine Lab. And this is where all of our experiments are run. And yeah, so split time.
Got it. Okay, we've got big shout outs from Cambria, California, South Carolina, San Francisco, Davenport on the coast, Ventura, San Marcos, Texas. Welcome everyone. First question for you, Maya, and Maya was very kind enough to send along a few pictures. I know we think we know what urchins look like, but let's just look at some while we talk. Um, because I think it'll give a little bit more flair to our convo today, if that's cool with everyone. All right, so Maya, tell us, if you wouldn't mind, what's an urchin?
Yeah, great question and a great place to start, I think. So urchins are benthic, which means they walk around the ocean floor, invertebrates, which means they don't have a spine. And so these marine benthic invertebrates play a really important herbivore role in the marine ecosystem, especially in kelp forest ecosystems. And so they eat pretty much algae. That's what an herbivore entails. And so they have pentaradial symmetry, which means that they have this star organization, which means that they're actually quite closely related to sea stars as well. And so you can't really tell just looking at these urchins, right? But if you flip them over, you can see that they have these jaws underneath them that they eat the ocean floor with, and then you'll see this star symmetry similar to sea stars.
And are there many different kinds of urchin? The one we're looking at now, the purple urchin, I'm in Northern California. So this is the one that I'm most familiar with seeing wash up on a seashore, or at a tide pool. Are there other kinds of urchins?
Yeah, so here in California, and particularly in Northern California, we have red urchins and we have purple urchins. And so this is a picture here of purple urchins. Red urchins are in a different genus than the purple urchins. But if you go more up along the western coast of North America, you also get greens. And so they're about middle size between a purple and a red. So reds are much bigger than purples, and greens are like right in the middle. Another kind of fun, interesting fact about these is that they're super long-lived. And so urchins reach sexual maturity around 2 years, but they can live to 40 years.
Wow.
And then red urchin can live 100 years that they've found. And so the reason to
Really?
figure that out is that they actually radiocarbon dated some of the calcium carbonate structures in these urchin and found deposits along the Japanese coastline for when the atomic bombs were dropped. And so there is that radioactive signature in the urchins, which allow us to understand these urchins were here for a long time and potentially living very, very long.
Okay, so my having done, I worked at Alta for 7 years. We've done a lot of environmental conservation conversations around animal life, not just marine life, but animals throughout the West. And conserving them has always, for the most part, seemed to be the theme of how do we combat climate change and stop the decline of populations. What is going on with urchins that various stakeholders, kind of a two-part question. What is the problem with urchins that various stakeholders are struggling against? And who are those different stakeholders? I know that, people, fisher folks have different motivations than marine biologists or conservation activists. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'll start with what's happening with the urchins now, and then I'll get into the stakeholder question next. So I want to explain it first as there's been this perfect storm of negative things happening, especially here on the north coast of California. So in 2014 to 2016, a series of marine heat waves came to the California coast that was made worse by the cyclical El Nino cycles that come through, every 5 to 7 years or so. And it brought these really, really record-breaking warm temperatures to the north coast of California. And when I say the north coast, I'm talking Marin, Sonoma, Mendocino, up into Humboldt as well. And what happened is that this warm water came and it sat on the coast for quite a long time. And so this weakened the kelp that exists here. And kind of like the kelp you can see in the back of my screen here, this is bull kelp. And so the bull kelp has this really narrow thermal range that they can exist in. And so when this marine heat wave came through, this weakened the kelp because this was outside of the normal range that they were experiencing. And so with kelp weakened and then all of these urchins hungry, they started chomping away at the weak kelp. In addition, this perfect storm brought along warm water that seemed to make this sea star wasting disease much worse. And so what sea star wasting disease is, it's not necessarily triggered by warm water, but it's definitely made worse by warm water. And what happened is that this warm water and this disease swept through sea star populations and killed, I think the number is like 99% of sea stars.
Oh,
So a huge amount of sea stars were dying because of this disease. And I actually hasn't haven't personally seen this myself, but I've read many reports of people just swimming in, and maybe some of the viewers today can attest to this as well, just swimming in the ocean in from Washington to Oregon to here, and just sea stars falling apart like goop. It was awful. Yeah, just arms falling off and then they'd eventually die. And the reason that's so important in terms of the urchin question is because the primary predators of urchin are sea stars. So sea stars, especially the sunflower star, also known as Pycnopodia, they can just mow down urchins like crazy. And because there's no sea otters in the North Coast system anymore, because they were hunted out in like the early 1900s or so, we also don't have the sea otter predator. And so basically what has happened is that these native purple urchins had now no controls. And so they just grew and proliferated throughout the system, chomping all the already weak kelp, and now have shifted the balance of the ecosystem to now these urchin barren states where there's no more kelp and a whole bunch of urchin.
wow. It's like the butterfly effect of just like a million things are going wrong, and now there's all of these urchins.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm understanding what are the urchins doing that are specifically a problem. I'm understanding why from a conservation point of view. I'm not understanding why from a someone who fishes point of view.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that all of these different stakeholders, so like you said, fishermen and scientists and nonprofits and the government, we all have these different backgrounds, but I think together it's intertwined with we all want the kelp forest to come back, right? And especially with the tribal presence here as well, the indigenous folks here also have a large stake in this, and we all are working toward this, and so. Urchin fishermen have historically collected urchin to sell, right? And when you go out into the North Coast, there's no food for them, so urchins are kind of in this like starved state, kind of in pause. And when
We
you open
have
up
a
an
picture of that,
urchin,
I think.
when you open up an urchin, exactly, this is what it looks like inside. So fishermen can't sell this to restaurants, right? So see these like, can you see my mouse? I don't know if you can see my mouse. No,
No.
anyways, so these little like brown lines you can see at the back of
Yes.
urchin test or the shell, those are the gonads. That's uni. That's the uni that you would expect to see on your plate that the urchin fishermen want to put out there for money. But when they look like this, no one's going to buy that. No one's going to
Sure.
eat that, right? And so we all have this joint same motivation to understand why they did so well when the warm water hit and why 10 years, almost 10 years later now, they're still persisting despite there being very little food out there. And so it's the conservation aspect and it's also the sustenance aspect, right? They can't sell this because it's not appetizing at all. So I think our feelings are one and the same in terms of the moving forward.
Before I shut down the images, what you included this one. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so this is I probably should have mentioned this when we were talking about what a sea urchin is. So this is a really zoomed in image. I didn't take this image, but Beth has the photo creds that she can share later. So this is a really zoomed image of a female urchin spawning. So sea urchins broadcast spawn, which basically means that they're walking along the seafloor, they receive some cue from the environment and it's like, okay, now it's time to reproduce. So the females release eggs and the male release sperm, and they're just kind of swirling around in the ocean fertilization happens outside of the animal, and then they develop into a little baby larvae. And then the larvae floats in the ocean currents for sometimes months, and then they settle down to the ocean floor and then start their benthic life history stage again. So all those little yellow spheres, they're like really, really tiny. They look almost like sand. Those are eggs. And so a female can release millions of eggs at once. Um, Sea urchin have spines, so these are like the long purple pokey things you can see in the picture. They
Yeah.
also have something called pedicelaria, so it's like I don't know if you can see that like three-pronged appendage coming out in the middle of the screen here. That helps them catch food as it goes by. And then they also have tube feet. So tube feet, they kind of look like long tentacles with suction cups at the end of them. But unlike tentacles and suction cups, they're not suction cupping like you would in a like an octopus would. What they're doing is they're walking along the ocean floor and they're actually excreting a glue every time they put their foot down. And then every time they're ready to pull their foot up, they release this enzyme and it dissolves the glue and then they can just keep walking. And they're doing that thousands of times as they're roving the ocean floor.
Very slowly.
Yeah, very slowly. I mean, it depends what like you can compare them
I've
to.
never seen an urchin move.
Yeah, they move. They not as fast as fish, but
They're crawling along.
faster than snails, I guess.
Okay. I had no idea.
Crawling along.
I do want to give your photo credits. Okay, so this one is by Bennett Whitnell. Shout out to Bennett. And then this image is by Abby Diaz. And the last one, the poor starving urchin with the uni that no one wants to eat, is by you, Maya.
Right.
Um, okay, so as we dive in kind of further, I want to talk to you about um, do scientists the article by Kailyn McCord talks about now there are some of these stakeholders, be them scientists or fishermen, are actively trying to cull or kill urchin populations. And this is kind of a two-part question. Um, Number one, really? We're going to go kill these beautiful sea creatures? And number two, to help the environment, to help this problem, are we all, those of us along the coast who see urchins, are we all supposed to be killing them?
I really appreciate this question, and I think this is kind of the core of some of the ethical sides of things that we address in our everyday lives as people working on this issue. And so I want to be very clear up front. I don't think everyone should be going out and killing urchin. I think that that is not the right thing to do. Also, purple urchins are native to the California coastline, and it's because of human influence that this ecosystem has been shifted out of balance, right? So, all in all, I don't think everyone should go out killing urchins in the tide pools because they serve a really important role in the ecosystem as herbivores. Now, that being said, I also want to say that urchin barrens are a huge issue on the North Coast right now because of the lack of biodiversity and all these other important things that help do for the ecosystem, like and the world, like carbon sequestration, coastal buffering, storm protections, all this stuff that is really important for just like general ecosystem health. And so what's happening right now is that there are multiple methods that have been employed to try to reduce the urchin numbers in the subtidal ecosystems. And so when I mean subtidal, I mean reefs that are underwater as opposed to intertidal, which are like tiny pockets of water that you can walk along and see these urchins as well. And so what's happening right now is government agencies, nonprofits, fishermen, and as well as universities and academics are working together in this collaborative push forward to do urchin removals. And so I've seen multiple ways to do this. Some people, I've never seen this, but someone has a vacuum where they've actually vacuumed the urchins off the sea floor. Other people are urchin divers and they fill up these baskets and then bring them up to their boat and then compost them on land. And then there's other options where people have gone through with hammers and have been smashing urchin. And all there are pros and cons of all of these methods. Of course, like hauling a bunch of urchin up on shore is a huge amount of work and quite heavy. I mean, every time you can haul out tons and tons. But then alternatively, the hammer smashing is a little bit, you need to be careful about that because as you saw, urchin have gonads inside of them. If you smash them and they are ready to reproduce, you will just release the gametes into the water column and actually contribute to the urchin problem because of potential gametes being released into the water in these mass quantities. And so I think there are definitely pros and cons of all of these, but we're all working together to try to see, okay, what are the effects if we take urchin out? Will the kelp come back?
Harold asks, what food source did urchins shift to after the kelp supply vanished?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a large part of my dissertation is trying to figure out why they've done so well after all this time, right? Because if they've eaten all the kelp and kelp is not returned, what are they eating? And so I really appreciate that question because I'm dedicating years of my life to try to figure out what's going on. And basically, what we found so far is that there are other algae available, not just kelp. So there's reds and other greens that they can graze on. There's also something called coral encrustose algae. So if you've ever gone into a tide pool and seen that like maroon or pink stuff covering the rocks, it's kind of like it looks like rocks almost, but it's just covering the rocks. That's called coral encrustose algae. And urchins have been known now to graze on even that. And it's not as um appetizing for them to eat, but if it's the only thing they've got left, then that's what they'll eat. And then the last thing that we've noticed is that they way reduce their metabolism. So it's kind of like they're waiting out the storm for something to come by. If a piece of drift algae comes by, they're going to grab it and chomp it up. But while they're waiting for conditions to become more optimal, they just kind of go into, I don't want to say hibernation because that's not what it is, but they reduce their metabolism so they can just kind of hold on until they can get food down the line.
Is there, first of all, is the urchin problem exclusive to the West Coast, to the Pacific coast of North America?
Yeah, so no, the answer is no. There have been fluctuations between urchin barrens and kelp states a bunch of times throughout history, and it's been observed in Canada. It's been observed in the East Coast because there are urchins out on the East Coast of United States as well, up into Canada as well. You can see them down in Florida. You can see it down in the Caribbean. You can see it in other temperate reefs around the world. But what's really interesting is that even within our system here in California, urchin numbers have actually differed depending on where you are. And so here in Northern California, urchin numbers have really increased, right? But in Southern California, after the marine heat wave, urchin numbers have decreased. And so that's why it's important I want to stress, like, we should not be going out and killing these if you say live in San Diego or Santa Barbara, because urchins are actually decreasing in size in population. So there's a lot of unknowns here because even within just our state, there are differences in how these populations are responding to warming water.
Wild. All right. Is there a point, is there a chart somewhere that says when the urchin population reaches this level, we're going to back off the urchins? Or is there some kind of measurable thing? When the kelp forest returns to a certain level of viability, or is there a benchmark for kind of backing off the urchins?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's still so many unknowns in that front that I can't confidently say. But there's a lot of work happening right now with folks at Sonoma State are doing in the Greater Fairloans Association, which is a federal agency. They're working together to try to outplant kelp. So kind of like reforestation that you would see in, any terrestrial forest. That's what's happening here at Bodega Marine Lab. And so kelp is being grown in culture in the lab and then outplanted to the wild. And so the idea is, can we prioritize sites for urchin removal so that we can outplant kelp and hopefully make the kelp as successful as possible? If you outplant kelp and you don't control urchin, you're not going to be successful. And so that's kind of the main take home there. So I think prioritizing, but yeah, I would like to say that there's hope in and an end in sight where we don't have to do this forever because, just nature will take its course eventually. But I've seen some really interesting work coming out of New Zealand where they have a kelp forest and they're only culling around the edges of the kelp forest. And that allows for kelp persistence within. So I think there are options out there, but as of right now on the North Coast, with a relatively recent urchin barren of 10 years or so. I think stay tuned because I don't know for sure.
You mentioned that this urchin problem, and the kind of myriad of problems that are affecting oceans around the world are caused by humans. This is our fault. Uh, I mean, if we're talking about climate change, yes, we can
Correct.
say it. Okay,
We can say it, yeah.
it's real. It's climate change, you guys. Um, is there, I mean, will the small changes that we are making, and I'm removing myself, we've learned don't go smashing urchins on our own with hammers thinking that we're being helpful. Um, Kind of leave it to the experts, be them fishermen, scientists, environmentalists, government agencies. Is there something that we can do outside of, our usual try and buy an electric vehicle, the compost that will help this particular problem? Or are we just supposed to stand back and leave it to the experts?
So there are many volunteer opportunities with these agencies that you can contribute to urchin removal. So I think a lot of people who are putting the time into this, it would be way easier because many hands make light work. And so if you're a diver or if you want to contribute to the issue or and help in some way with the agency, people take volunteers all the time. And so I would reach out to whatever one is closest to you, and I can definitely connect people with how they can help as well. I also think that it's important to just not lose hope in this. I think, with just the general climate of the world and what's happening here in our North Coast, it's quite depressing sometimes. And I think if we all just give up, then there's no saving the kelp forest, right? And so there's a lot of people that are dedicating their careers, myself included, to trying to figure out why this happened back then, why it's continuing now, and then how we can move forward as opposed to just letting it all go. And so I know that's kind of uh, it's not tangible, that kind of thing, but I think just in the back of our minds, I think we need to keep that as moving forward.
Yeah, we're not going to give up.
Great.
J.Y. Vered asks, what is the lantern of Aristotle? I quickly Googled this just to make sure it was on topic. You never know, the internet comments. But can you tell us about the lantern of Aristotle?
Yeah, so Aristotle's lantern is basically the jaw of the sea urchin. And so you can't see it if you just hold the urchin. Um, but so the urchin is this like sphere-like thing, right? And it's walking along the sea floor. If you pick one up and turn it upside down, you can see the little white jaws sticking out.
Yeah.
But if you dissect an urchin, it's actually this independently roving mouth part that is chomping on the sea floor. And so it has this soft tissue around it that allows it to move independently from the urchin. And it's how they eat.
Okay. JY, I hope that answers your question. I love the name Aristotle's Lantern. That is a cool, not too sciencey name for me.
Yeah.
Um, Questions. Are there JY asks another question. Have there been efforts to reintroduce sea otters? Bring back
Oh,
those
great
darling otters.
question. Great question. Yeah. This is not my area, so I will give you the 1,000-foot view answer. It's It's contested, and I think that there are pros and cons for sure. Um, I think the push is to reintroduce otters, but otters have not been here for over 100 years, and so there's a lot of considerations and a lot of challenges associated with reintroduction. Otters are very site specific, and um, when you try to move them, they always want to go back home. Can't blame them, right? But there's also a lot of benefits to having them back into the system because they can mow through urchin like crazy. They can eat, I mean, way over their own weight of urchins in a day. And so, that's kind of like the natural uh hammer smashing, right? Because they just do it themselves and they eat the gonads and they eat the uni as opposed to, smashing them for nothing. And so I think I will leave it at that because I don't know where it stands in terms of actual movement to reintroduce things, but I think people are talking about it, and I would say keep your eyes out for news on that.
Where are we? And I'm asking this question on behalf of our creative director, John Gecky, who is a fancy food eater. Where is the fancy uni that we see, beautifully laid across rice and, very fancy restaurants? Where is that coming from? If these urchins are starving, where's the James Beard Award winning uni dish originating from?
Great question. And so this is another aspect of my work. I see myself as a marine ecologist, but I also am really interested in aquaculture. And so have you heard of urchin ranching?
No.
It's kind of this funny term that has been new. So you can take these starving barren urchins out of the wild, bring them into the lab, feed them whatever you want, right, for that optimal color and flavor and texture, and then you can just sell them at that point. So you're ranching the urchins that are barren, fill them up, they can go from empty to full in about 8 weeks, and then you can sell them commercially. Um,
It's like fattening the calf for slaughter, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yes, but yeah, they don't have eyes and cute little ears like a calf does, but,
They're darling. That's why I was so shocked at this article. Kill the urchins.
yeah, yeah. But in sushi restaurants, you can actually see sometimes or ask the chef where the urchins are from. I see a lot of them from Santa Barbara actually, and they're probably serving red urchin, not purples, at the moment. And then they also ship them over from Japan as well. And so it's a mixed bag, I would say, but it's kind of dependent on where the fishermen have luck finding these animals.
How are the kelp forests in Japan?
Oh, great question.
I realize you're in Bodega Bay.
I I don't know. But that is something I should probably look into.
That's a PhD for your dissertation or thesis or whatever. I have a
Right.
bachelor's degree. I have no idea how far you're going to take this, but it seems to me that like I was recently in, and I realized that we're going over time, Sea Ranch, and there were all sorts for the first time. I go to Sea Ranch every year with my family, and it was the first time that I saw so many urchin, I don't know that shells is the right word, but skeletons,
Mhm.
hundreds of them along the beaches. That was
Hmm.
really surprising to me. Is this, and I don't know what I'm talking about. I am not a scientist, but could this be, I mean, are we going to start seeing more and more um urchin skeletons or dead urchins along beaches, particularly in like Sonoma Mendocino coast where culling is actively happening? Or is this mostly done through the vacuum thing you were talking about, through kind of more organized scientific methods that we won't really see the effects of in person?
Yeah, I actually am not quite sure. We have some field sites out in Sea Ranch as well, so maybe I'll see you one of these days out in Mendocino, but or is that still Sonoma? I get
Still
confused with
Sonoma.
the line. That's still Sonoma, sorry.
Right there.
Um, yeah, yeah. So, I don't know who is in charge of that urchin removal, but the people that I work with mostly take their urchin that they've collected and compost them like more inland. Like they don't compost them that close or on the beach. Because when urchin die and they kind of sit in piles, they start to stink, and no one
Sure.
wants to lay on the beach and smell that. So the idea is to take the urchin and compost them in an actual facility. So yeah, I don't expect or anticipate that to be all over the beaches now, because many of the people take them offshore and bring them inland. So yeah, and people don't want to smell that while they're trying to have a nice picnic. So hopefully you don't see too much more of that.
Last question before we let you get back to the urchins. Dan asks, and I'm with Dan on this one, is it possible to help the sea stars respawn? I'm really surprised that you were discussing what I would call a starfish, which I realize is a totally incorrect term. Um, Disintegrating. That's
I know.
heartbreaking. Who doesn't love a starfish? Is there anything
Yeah,
being done?
yeah, great question. I think I've mentioned this like 10 times already, but this problem is full of collaboration. And so, there's people working on sea urchins, like our group, but there's also people that are working on kelp outplanting and growing in the lab. There's also a huge group focused on captive breeding of Pycnopodia, or the sunflower star. And so there are groups close to us is in California Academy of Sciences. They're trying to grow these tiny, tiny Pycnopodia that grow like this big, and they have like 25 arms, and yeah, they're incredibly good at eating urchin, and they're beautiful as well. And then Piesaster, which are the ochre stars that you've probably seen if you've walked in the tide pools. They are making a return, so you can see those in the North Coast tide pools still. And then I know up in Friday Harbor Labs at the University of Washington, they're also rearing Pycnopodia as well. I know there are some other places around the coast that I'm not familiar with, but it's a problem that people are definitely working on and trying to outplant those at some point as well.
This is so informative, Maya. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your enthusiasm for the sea urchin. I feel like we all learned a ton. I see people are sharing articles and links in the chat. That is so great. Folks, we are going to send you an email with a link to this interview, a link to Kailyn McCord's article on the sea urchin. Anything else that pops up, Maya, shoot me an email if you've got, your website that you want us to plug or that people can visit. And I do want to invite you all again to that event at Kepler's Books in Menlo Park on April 15th. That's free, or no, it's $10. And we'll include a link to that. There's also, we're at the LA Times Festival of Books on the 26th and 27th at the USC campus. And join us next week here at Alta Live, where we are going to talk about the black bears of Tahoe. They have been stealing everyone's food and getting dangerous attack to human. So we're going to talk about that article by Jordan Fisher-Smith next week with him. Maya Munstermann, again, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to talk to us about sea urchins.
Of course. Thank you, Beth. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.